The plane hums steadily. As it ascends into the sky, each passenger finds their seat and settles in for the journey ahead. A few stare out the window, lost in thoughts of where they're headed. Some nervously fidget with their seatbelts, while others slip into a quiet doze. In the midst of it all sits a man whose presence seems to carry a weight far heavier than the plane itself. He sits near the window, dressed in a simple jacket, his worn military cap perched atop his head. His gaze is fixed, not on the outside view, but on the seat in front of him. His hands rest on his lap, one of them gripping the armrest with more force than necessary. Beneath his jacket is a prosthetic leg, the artificial limb resting against the floor with a subtle creak every time he shifts in his seat. The man's movements are deliberate, each action calculated, as if his body has been trained to move with the precision of a soldier long past his prime. But even in his silence, it is clear that he carries the memories of battles fought in far-off lands, ones that no one in this cabin could ever truly understand. The air in the plane is thick with quiet conversation, but his seat remains largely untouched, save for the occasional glance from a fellow passenger curious about the man in the military cap. His eyes flicker across the cabin, every so often, his gaze lingering on the flight attendants as they move up and down the aisles delivering drinks or checking on passengers. But his thoughts seem to drift elsewhere, as if the hustle and bustle of the flight were a distant hum compared to the memories that play behind his eyes. His fingers curl around the armrest again, and he exhales softly, a quiet sound that could almost go unnoticed, except for the slight tension in his face, as if even now he is at war with himself. His gaze shifts to the overhead compartment just above him. His eyes narrow slightly as he contemplates the effort it would take to reach his bag, sitting there too far for comfort. The veteran has done this countless times in his life. The simple task of reaching for something that others might take for granted becomes an ordeal that requires patience and determination. But today he knows he needs help. His hand rises slightly, and his eyes find the flight attendant walking down the aisle, a young woman with a friendly smile. It's a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes, but it's there nonetheless. As she makes her way down the rows, she pauses only briefly when she notices his raised hand. He feels the weight of the moment like a heavy stone in his chest. His heart skips a beat. He wonders if she'll notice the discomfort, if she'll take a moment to see beyond the surface, to recognize him as someone who isn't just another passenger, but someone who has lived a life full of stories that remain untold. She meets his gaze briefly, and he waits for her to approach, hoping for some small recognition. But when she stops beside him, her eyes flicker over him quickly before she speaks in a voice that seems to come from a place of hurry. Her words are polite but distant. "I can't help you right now," she says with a quick glance at her watch. "I'm too busy with other things." She says it with a kind of finality that leaves no room for conversation or debate. He nods quietly, but the sting of her words lingers like a bitter taste on his tongue. He watches as she walks away without another glance back, and for a moment he feels as if the years of service and sacrifice have been erased by her indifference. The veteran's chest tightens. He forces his fingers to release the armrest and takes a deep breath. The muscles in his prosthetic leg ache slightly, but he doesn't move, not yet. He's learned the hard way not to push when the world refuses to slow down for you, so he remains in his seat, hands resting once again on his lap, staring ahead, his gaze distant, but filled with the quiet resolve of a man who has seen much and expects little. Yet, even in the stillness of his moment, there's a flicker of something in his eyes, of quiet resignation that he'll never ask for help again, at least not from her, not from this flight, not from anyone. The veteran sits still, his eyes focused on the seat in front of him. The hum of the plane is a constant companion, but it feels distant, almost muffled, like the world outside his bubble is fading away. His thoughts begin to drift. His fingers tap lightly against his leg, the rhythm slow and methodical, as if he's counting something, a habit born of years spent in quiet moments of reflection. The flight attendant moves up and down the aisle again, her steps brisk, her face an expression of forced cheerfulness. As she stops to serve the other passengers, she offers polite words with a practiced smile. But he sees it now, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the tightness in her shoulders, as if she's carrying a weight of her own. Her words are empty to him. They feel rehearsed, distant, the kind of words given when no one really expects anything in return. It's easy to see she doesn't notice him. Not really, she doesn't see the way his hands tremble, the faint flicker of pain in his eyes, the weight of all the years carried in his posture. He turns his attention to the window, his reflection, faint in the glass, the reflection of a man who has fought battles far beyond the wars he served, and he wonders how many others have brushed past him like that, too many to count, no one looking close enough to see the story in his eyes. How many times had he asked for help only to be ignored or given the briefest of responses? He leans back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment, the pressure in his chest building with every breath. His leg aches. But it's a pain he's learned to live with. It's not the pain of the body that weighs on him now. It's the sting of being unseen, the sting of someone deciding that his need wasn't worth their time. He wonders if she even thought twice about him. When she walked away, probably not. He can't help but feel a quiet frustration simmering beneath the surface. He's used to being overlooked. It's part of the reality of his life. After the uniform comes off and the medals are stored away, the world forgets about you. You become just another face in the crowd. He lets out a slow breath. He's not angry, he tells himself. Not really, just tired, the kind of tired that comes from a lifetime of small dismissals that stack up until you can no longer carry the weight of them. All at once his phone vibrates in his pocket. His hand moves instinctively to it. His heart skips a beat. But when he looks at the screen, he sees that it's not a message from anyone he knows. It's a call from the airline, a number he doesn't recognize. The veteran hesitates, his finger hovering over the green button. The buzz of the phone feels out of place on the plane. The ringing feels louder than it should. As he listens to it echo in the quiet cabin, he almost doesn't answer it. He almost lets it go. But something inside him stirs a faint curiosity and a little hope, maybe, just a tiny bit of hope. He swipes the screen and brings the phone to his ear. Hello, his voice is low and steady, but inside his stomach churns. The voice on the other end is calm, but there's something urgent beneath it. Sir, we need to speak with you about your special arrangements. The veteran's brow furrows as he listens. We've been informed that there was an issue with the service provided to you today, and we want to address it immediately. The words feel surreal as they sink in. His thoughts begin to race. He tries to piece together what's happening. Was this some kind of mistake? The voice continues detailing the arrangements that had been made for him. The veteran's mind spins, his hand tightens around the phone as the realization begins to settle in. This wasn't just any flight. This wasn't just any journey. He was more than just a passenger, more than just another man sitting in a seat today of all days. There had been plans made for him. But he hadn't been treated that way, not by her, not by the young woman who had dismissed his requests so easily. The voice on the other end keeps speaking, but the veteran's mind races ahead to what this all means. And as he listens, something inside him shifts, something he hadn't expected, a quiet ripple of frustration mixed with disbelief. He closes his eyes again for a brief moment, trying to hold on to the weight of the conversation while processing the truth that has just been handed to him. The veteran listens intently as the voice on the other end continues speaking. The words blur together, but they carry a weight he hadn't expected. The airline had made special arrangements for him. Due to his service, he's been a hero in the eyes of the company, but none of that had been reflected in the way he was treated on this flight. The call continues, explaining how they had planned for him to have a much more comfortable experience, how they had made sure he'd be given priority assistance with his baggage and any other needs. Yet here he was sitting in his seat, ignored by the very person who was supposed to help him. He can feel the blood rushing to his head, a wave of heat flooding his face as frustration bubbles up from deep inside him. He wants to interrupt the call, demand to know why he was treated this way, why his needs were brushed off, as if they didn't matter, but something holds him back. The quiet voice on the other end explains that the flight attendant who had dismissed him had not been made aware of his status, had not been told about the arrangements made for him. No one had informed her he had been given no special instructions about him, not about the man who had earned his place with honor and sacrificed. The veteran's grip tightens around the phone, and for the first time in a long time, he feels his body tense with anger. The flight attendant's words now replay in his mind, the way she had dismissed him so casually, her eyes not seeing his struggle, his pain, as if he were just another inconvenience. It stings deeper now, because he realizes it wasn't entirely her fault. But that doesn't make it feel any less personal. He looks out the window again, trying to ground himself. But the view is a blur. He feels as if he's floating somewhere between reality and the memory of the battles he fought in a world where people saw him as someone who had given everything. But now it feels like that sacrifice has been forgotten, that his service no longer matters. He takes a deep breath, trying to steady his mind. But the sting of being overlooked doesn't go away so easily. He's been through so much in his life, fought wars, seen death, lost comrades, and survived the worst of what life could throw at him. But this feeling, this simple dismissal, this act of being unseen cuts deeper than he expected. He runs his hand across his face, sighing heavily as his mind races with questions he wants answers. But what good would they do now? What good would it do to confront someone who wasn't even aware of who he was? How do you explain the weight of a lifetime to someone who hasn't lived it, to someone who can't possibly understand? He thinks back to the young flight attendant and the brief encounter earlier. She hadn't seen him. She hadn't seen his pain or his past. She hadn't seen the things he's carried inside of him for so long. And maybe she never would. He wonders if anyone really sees him anymore, or if he's just another old man fading into the background of a world that moves too fast for him to catch up with. He's about to speak when the voice on the other end of the phone interrupts, again apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding, explaining that the airline will make it right, that they will ensure he gets the assistance he needs when they land. But all the words blur together now, and the veteran realizes that none of it will undo what happened. None of it will undo the cold brush of indifference from a young woman who didn't take a moment to really look at him. His fingers curl into a fist in his lap, but his thoughts are too clouded to make sense of any of it. He doesn't know what he expected from this call. Maybe an apology, maybe some kind of explanation, but nothing feels like it will make up for the disappointment in his chest. It feels like something inside him is slowly cracking, and no matter how many words are said over the phone, he won't be able to fix what has been broken. The veteran lowers the phone slowly, his grip loosening. As he stares at the screen for a moment longer, the call ends, but the words don't seem to leave his mind. They echo in his head like a drumbeat, and with each echo, the frustration grows deeper. The apology, the promises to make things right, they all feel hollow now. The veteran's eyes flicker toward the flight attendant once again. She's moving down the aisle again. This time her face is slightly more tense, her smile still in place. But there's a wariness about her now. He watches her more closely than he did before. Something about her seems different now, more human, in a way he hadn't noticed. Before he remembers her words from earlier, how she had dismissed him without hesitation, how she had seemed so confident that her busy schedule couldn't accommodate a simple request for help. But now there's a shift in her demeanor. She's not as quick to approach the passengers as she was before. Her movements seem more deliberate now, more cautious, as if she's worried about something. He doesn't know if it's guilt or if it's just the weight of the job, but something about her has changed, and it makes him wonder if she knows what just happened, or if she even realizes the gravity of the situation. The veteran's mind races again. He doesn't know if he should confront her or just let it go. But there's a small part of him that wants to let her know that he sees her now. He sees the cracks in her facade, the same way she had seen his own cracks in that brief moment when she had dismissed him. Without thinking, he exhales slowly, his fingers tapping against the seat in front of him. He feels the urge to speak to her, but the words are stuck in his throat. It's not anger that's holding him back. It's something else, a quiet sense of resignation. He spent so much of his life being ignored and overlooked that confronting her would feel like just another futile attempt to make someone understand his experience. He wonders if it's worth the effort to try, if it will change anything, or if it will just be another moment that slips through the cracks unnoticed. The flight continues, and the cabin hums with the noise of 1,000 little conversations. The veteran doesn't pay attention to them. He's too lost in his own thoughts. Now the frustration that had burned so hot just moments ago begins to simmer down, replaced by something else, a kind of exhaustion, a weariness that has nothing to do with the flight itself. He wants to sleep. He wants to escape into the quiet of his mind and let the world go on without him for just a little while. But his eyes keep drifting toward the flight attendant again. There's something about her, something he can't quite place, the way she moves more carefully. Now the way her eyes seem to flicker toward him now, and then like she's worried that he's watching her. He doesn't know if it's guilt, or if it's just the weight of the job, but there's a softness in her actions now that wasn't there before. He wonders if she regrets her earlier words, or if she's just doing what she can to get through the rest of the flight. The veteran tries to push these thoughts away, but they linger like a shadow in his mind. He tries to distract himself by looking out the window, but the view is nothing more than a blur of clouds and sky. He sighs quietly and settles back in his seat, his body aching from the long hours of sitting. But it's more than that. It's the ache of someone who has spent too long feeling invisible, too long carrying the weight of everything inside without ever asking for help, too long believing that no one would ever see him for who he really is. The thought stings more than it should, but it's a familiar sting, one he's learned to live with. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the sound of the plane's engines wash over him. It's not peace, but it's the closest thing he's felt in a long time, and for now that will have to be enough. The veteran's thoughts swirl like the clouds outside the window, his mind unable to find rest or escape, as he feels the hours stretch on the phone call has left a mark on him, a bruise that won't fade so easily. As much as he tries to push it to the back of his mind, it keeps resurfacing. His anger at being ignored, his frustration with the way things had unfolded, it all mixes together in his chest. And no matter how hard he tries to breathe through it, the weight doesn't lift. But something inside him also tells him that the answers aren't in this moment. They're not in confronting the flight attendant or making her feel bad. It's not in demanding justice for a small mistake. It's somewhere deeper, hidden beneath the surface of it, all a quiet understanding that has taken him years to grasp. The world won't stop for you. It never will. People will miss the things that matter most about you. They will overlook your struggles and see you as nothing more than the label they put on you. And there's nothing you can do to change it. It's just the way it is. And maybe that's okay. But the more he thinks about it, the more he wonders if it should be okay. How many people have been overlooked like this? How many have been dismissed in ways that left them feeling small and unimportant? He looks around the cabin, his eyes scanning the passengers, the flight attendants, the people who don't know his story, don't know who he really is, and for the first time in a long while he wonders if anyone ever truly sees him, not just as a soldier or an old man, but as a person with a lifetime of experiences tucked away beneath the surface. The flight attendant passes by again, and her steps quick, but she slows when she nears his seat. Her eyes flicker toward him, then away, and for the briefest moment their gazes meet. His eyes locked onto hers, and he sees it there, a shift. Something has changed in her eyes. She's not the same person who had dismissed him earlier, not the same person who had walked away without a second thought. There's an apology there hidden in her expression, something soft and unspoken. But the moment is gone as quickly as it came, and she moves past him, continuing with her duties. But he can't shake the feeling that something has shifted, something important, something he can't put into words. The veteran leans back in his seat, his hands resting on his lap, his fingers flexing as if trying to find release from the tension that still lingers in his muscles. But the moment of connection has left him with a quiet understanding, a realization that perhaps this story doesn't need to be about confrontation or anger. Maybe it's about something else. Maybe it's about the quiet moments of recognition, the ones that happen when no one is watching, when no one is trying to fix the wrongs, but just understanding that there's more to each person than meets the eye. Maybe it's the moment when we stop seeing each other for what we want to see and start seeing each other for what we are. He turns his head toward the window again, watching as the clouds drift by the world, below a blur of cities and roads that seem so far removed from him. Now he doesn't know where this flight will take him. He doesn't know what he will find when he gets off the plane. But in this moment, he feels something he hasn't felt in a long time, a fleeting sense of peace, a knowing that sometimes it's enough just to be seen, even if only for a moment, even if only by someone who wasn't ready to understand him at first. He takes another deep breath and leans back in his seat, the rest of the flight ahead of him, as the plane hums through the sky. And for the first time in hours, his body feels a little lighter, a little less burdened than it had before. The veteran's mind drifts again, this time less turbulent, less filled with the echoes of anger or frustration. It's a quiet calm that settles over him as he sits back in his seat. The plane continues its journey through the sky, and the hours tick by unnoticed. He can hear the soft murmur of conversations from the other passengers, the occasional clink of a drink tray, the rustling of newspapers. But it all feels far away, almost as if he's no longer part of this world. For a brief moment, he wonders if he's dreaming, if any of this is real. He closes his eyes for a second, and the sounds of the cabin fade into nothingness. It's just him alone with his thoughts. But even in this moment of quiet, there's a shift. Something is stirring beneath the surface, and he can feel it like the pull of a tide. He's not sure what it is or where it's leading, but there's something about this flight, something about this day, has changed him in ways he can't quite explain. He thinks back to the brief exchange with the flight attendant earlier, how she had dismissed him so easily, how her words had cut deeper than he expected, how the weight of being unseen had felt like an old wound reopening. But now something has softened in him, and in her it's like the weight of the world has been lifted for just a moment, and both of them have seen something they hadn't noticed before. The veteran doesn't know what to make of it, but he knows that this moment will stay with him for a while. It's the kind of moment that's impossible to forget, the kind of moment that stays with you and shapes the way you see the world. He shifts in his seat, feeling the subtle ache in his prosthetic leg, but it doesn't bother him as much now. It's almost as if he's forgotten about it for a brief moment. He flexes his toes, trying to ease the discomfort, but the pain feels distant now, the sting of the earlier dismissal, the frustration from the phone call. They all feel further away, as if the flight itself has carried them away into the sky, where they no longer hold weight. The flight attendant comes by again this time. Her steps are slower, more deliberate. Her eyes glance toward him, and for a moment their gazes meet again this time. There's no rush, no sense of urgency in her actions. She stops beside his seat, just for a moment, and looks at him not like she did before, not like she's checking off a task or moving through the motions, but like she's actually seeing him now. The veteran can't help but feel a shift inside of him as she stands there for a brief second. He wonders if she's going to say something, but she doesn't. Instead, she simply nods her head, once almost like a silent apology, something unspoken, but clear in that small gesture. He nods back slowly, and for a fleeting instant, he feels a connection, something raw and real, in the way they silently acknowledge each other's presence. It's a simple moment, but in its simplicity, it carries more weight than anything that's come before. The veteran doesn't say anything, and neither does she, but there's an understanding between them, now one that wasn't there before. It's not the kind of resolution he had expected or hoped for, but it's enough. It's a small moment of grace, a brief flash of human connection, in the middle of a world that often feels indifferent. And as she walks away, he can't help but feel a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that maybe the world doesn't always work the way we want it to, but there's still beauty to be found in the moments where we truly see each other, even if it's just for an instant. He leans back again, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the plane and the rhythm of his own breath soothe him. As the journey continues, the skies outside are wide and endless, and for the first time in a long while, the veteran feels like he's exactly where he's supposed to be. The veteran sits quietly as the plane continues its course through the sky. The noise of the engines becomes a familiar hum, a steady background to his thoughts. He feels a strange stillness in his chest, like something has shifted deep within him. He's not sure exactly when it happened, but he feels lighter, somehow freer, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying has been lifted. The discomfort in his leg still lingers, but it's bearable now, a minor irritation in the face of something deeper, something more profound. It's the feeling of being seen for the first time in so long, of not being invisible anymore. He can't explain why it matters so much, why the small moment with the flight attendant has meant more to him than anything else that's happened on this flight. But it does. The absence of anger, the quiet release of the frustration he had been holding on to, it's all gone now, replaced with a peacefulness that he hasn't known in years. As the plane starts its descent, the veteran feels his body preparing for the landing, the familiar tension in his shoulders, the way his hands instinctively grip the armrests. But this time it's different. This time he doesn't feel the usual surge of nerves or anxiety. He simply feels calm, a quiet sort of peace that settles over him as the earth comes closer. He watches as the clouds start to break apart and the ground below comes into focus. The landscape stretches out below like a patchwork quilt of roads and fields. He wonders what awaits him at the end of this journey. He doesn't know exactly what he's looking for, but something tells him he'll find it somehow. The plane shakes slightly as it begins its final approach. The veteran grips the armrest a little tighter, but his mind remains steady. The flight attendant makes her way down the aisle again. This time her eyes meet his as she passes, and there's no hesitation and no rush, just a brief acknowledgement, like they both understand something that didn't need to be spoken. She nods once more, and he nods back. His heart is steady as he watches her continue on to the front of the plane, a quiet connection forged in those few seconds of silent understanding. It's not the kind of dramatic moment he had once imagined in his mind. It's not the kind of confrontation or apology he had expected. It's something far more subtle, something that goes beyond words, beyond actions. It's a moment where two people see each other for who they truly are. And in that shared moment of recognition, everything else falls away. The veteran doesn't need anything more than that. He knows now that the world won't always make sense. The people around him won't always understand the battles he's fought. But that doesn't mean they're not worth fighting. It doesn't mean he hasn't been seen. Even in the smallest of ways, he lets out a slow breath as the plane touches down, the wheels screeching lightly against the runway. The cabin fills with the sound of the landing gear as it comes to a stop, and he feels his body relax as the tension finally eases. The flight is over, and with it the journey he's been on for so long. The veteran gathers his things slowly, his movements deliberate and calm as he prepares to leave the plane. The sense of peace remains with him like a quiet echo as he stands and stretches his legs. The flight attendant comes by once more, her eyes meeting his again. She offers a small smile this time. It's genuine, no forced cheer, no politeness, just a simple smile. And he returns it in kind. There's no need for words between them now, no need for explanations. Just two people who have shared something important, even if they never fully understand it. And as he walks down the aisle and out of the plane, the veteran feels something shift within him, a sense of closure, a sense of peace that he didn't expect to find today, but is grateful for all the same. The veteran steps off the plane, his legs still aching, but his heart lighter than it's been in years. He walks through the terminal feeling the weight of his pack shift on his back, and the steady rhythm of his steps grounding him in the present moment. The crowd is busy moving around him, the noise of conversations echoing off the walls, the rustle of footsteps all blending into one indistinguishable hum. But for the first time in a long time, he doesn't feel invisible. He doesn't feel like a ghost walking through the world unnoticed. He walks slower than most of the people around him, taking his time, not in a hurry to get anywhere, but savoring the feeling of being here, being part of the world again. As he moves through the crowds, his thoughts drift back to the flight, back to the small moment. With the flight attendant, the way she had looked at him after everything had happened, it wasn't much. But it was enough, it had been enough to shift something deep inside him. Something he hadn't even realized was missing until now, a connection that didn't require words or grand gestures. Just a simple acknowledgement of each other's humanity. He smiles to himself as he walks, his fingers brush against the cool metal of the airport's railings. But it's not the cold that catches his attention. It's the warmth of the people moving around him, the bustle of life that continues no matter what, no matter how many people like him are overlooked or forgotten. The world doesn't stop for anyone, but somehow it finds a way to move forward. And in that movement, he's found something valuable. He looks up as he hears an announcement over the speakers. The flight to his final destination is now boarding. But he doesn't rush to the gate. He takes his time, still moving through the terminal at his own pace. The noise around him fades again until it's just him. And the slow, steady rhythm of his footsteps. He knows he doesn't have to hurry anymore, not today. He's allowed to move at his own speed today. He's allowed to simply exist in the world. Without being invisible, he passes by a group of children laughing and playing in a small corner of the terminal. Their voices, loud and carefree, the sight of them brings a quiet smile to his face. He remembers the days when he was younger, when the world felt full of possibility, when every day felt like it had meaning, even in the darkest times. He can almost hear the sound of his younger self, laughing with his comrades, the sound of their voices filling the air as they face down challenges together. The memories are bittersweet, but they also bring a sense of warmth with them, a reminder that even in the hardest of times there had been moments of joy, moments of connection, moments that made it all feel worth it. He continues walking his feet, moving in time with the memories that come and go. And then he stops for a moment, taking in the scene around him, the people, the noise, the motion of life. It's all happening at once. And for the first time in a long time, he doesn't feel like he's standing outside of it. He feels like he's a part of it, like the world is moving with him instead of around him. It's a quiet feeling. But it's enough to make him stand still for a moment longer, just breathing in the life that surrounds him. He knows there's still more to his journey, more to discover, more to experience. But for now, he's content. He's not rushing to the end of the road anymore. He's simply walking it step by step at his own pace. And in this moment, he feels like he belongs. The veteran takes a deep breath as he turns toward the gate and begins walking again, not with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but with a quiet peace that he hasn't felt in years. His steps are steady now, his heart calm, as he moves forward into whatever comes next.